You know, this is a beautiful day on the Olympic Peninsula. I love being out here. I mean, all these trees, sunlight for once.
Yeah, for once. Not real chilly.
Exactly.
It's like 52 degrees this morning.
It's a great day, and I can't think of a better day to go visit our friends at Alpenfire. I mean, these guys are incredible.
Yeah.
Nancy, Bear, Philippe,
See you.
how are you guys doing?
Doing great. Good to see you, Eric.
Good to see you. Hey, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hey,
Hey, hey.
well, show us where the magic happens.
Okay, we want to welcome you. Alpenfire Cider, Alpenfire Orchards right here. Certified organic,
Nice.
18 years, 2003 we say. We've just finished one of our best prunings we've ever done. We were behind schedule.
The trees are beautiful.
They are, yeah.
Growth on these trees.
Yeah, just in the last 2 days. Yeah.
Well, thank God for that.
Yeah, it's really been great to see.
And look at these trellising. I mean, you'd almost think you're in a winery if you didn't know any better.
Yep, espaliers on the outside and trellises down the middle here. We basically designed these ourselves from study in New Zealand and Australia and Canada and what's over in Europe. And then we had to adapt because nobody had done this before. And we have built our system here being a 12 by 5, meaning the rows are 12 feet apart and every tree is either 3 foot or 5 foot. And these are dwarf trees. So at that next point, I had to figure out irrigation and the whole wire system. And Nancy and I were not that tall, so I made it 10 feet.
I resemble that.
Yeah. 10 feet's too tall for us anyway. So we cut back this year so we could have, these 4 rows, limbs on them, these whorls that we make in this slender spindle, that's what they call this. And
Well, let's get closer to one so you
sure.
can show us what you're talking about.
You know, they can really see the difference between this one, which is a 3-wire, so you can see how easy that is to harvest
Right.
compared to this, where you're like, oh.
Man, let's see how far your arm goes up. It's like, God, I don't want to use a
For guy
ladder.
Like me, that's pretty good.
So
Yeah.
basically you handpick everything too.
Well, everything is done by hand. Yeah. In fact,
Nothing jittler.
no. And then to go back a little bit, this whole property here was forested like that, right there. So we did the pioneer thing, like I always say. We had 13 children, and when we got done, we had Philippe. Mainly because we had to eat most of them after they didn't do their work. So all this was cleared. We milled all the timber off of here, became organic, which is our whole trellis system, our
How'd you
whole
get rid
fence.
of all the stumps? Because that's always a big problem. Did you burn them out?
Yeah, we did. We made these burns and then we spread all the ash, which is,
Yeah,
nice
natural
fertilizer
stuff.
all over and shaped the land so it could drain, because we are in a riparian area via the wildlife sanctuary, because this is just full of wildlife because of the wetland type thing.
Well, we're in a maritime environment, and the maritime climate is where all the great ciders come in: Normandy, Brittany, Bass, England, and the Olympic Peninsula.
The Olympic Peninsula is perfect for this. In fact, we've been part of a program with WSU to test these apples. It was about 10 years ago, and find out their astringencies, their tannins, and their everything. There's been a lot of people grafting east of the mountains on those, those Red Delicious and that other horrible stuff that they grew in Washington State, and put cider apples on them, and then they tested. Came here, we picked. We didn't have the bricks because we're growing these things for bricks, not for eating, because you can't. There's tannin in them.
And bricks is sugar content at Harvey.
Sugar
Usually
content.
23, 24 bricks.
This is cider because we're not trying to get
I'm thinking
12.
wine.
Yeah, wine.
Sorry.
Isn't that some? We'd love to, because then we could make something else. We'd have to get a different license. But no, we want 11 to 15. They'll give our 7%. There's a break point there with the Tax Trade Bureau. So we try to give
difference.
Yeah. But the whole system is basically the same as a winery. We've got the drip irrigation. We've got this trellis system for your limbs, and in a whirl where we can get, instead of the 2-dimensional, it's a 3-dimensional system. And we get a lot of fruit. This is a pretty mature orchard now for a dwarf system at 18 years. And we're averaging, what do you think, Nance? 38 to 40 900-pound bins out of here.
Wow.
Which gives us about our 3,000 gallons of our certified organic product, and that's another part of the story over there. But
You were saying about grafting onto these horrible Red Delicious, the apples tasted different or tested different.
they did. They tasted different. They totally looked different. Like, for instance, the Arlington Ale was especially, that was on either a John Gold or Red Delicious, and it was elongated, it was bigger, it was flabby tasting, and the tannins were in its high. And we actually have all this recorded data about the tannins. We actually have the most tannic apple in Washington State. It's a French bittersweet called a bilberry. And if you came back later on when we had some of those on the tree, I would hand you one and not tell you anything about it. You take a bite or two off this and your lips go numb.
Well,
That's some pretty big tannins, you know.
Yeah. Tannin is what gives a wine and I guess a cider its structure. I mean, in the wine world, we think of it as tannins are the skeletal of the body, and all the flavor and flesh is hung on those and can't stand up without it. Is it the same
True.
with cider?
It is totally the same with cider. We think that's the kind of cider we make. A lot of people will use just a regular delicious fruit, but we chose to grow these bittersweets and bitter sharps all from England and France.
And they probably have lower yields than some of these big commercial ones that they use in unnamed giant producers.
What do you think?
The apples themselves have lower yield, I'd say so.
Yeah.
They're generally smaller, and they tend to be better quality if you let them sweat for a couple weeks after you pick them.
Maceration.
Before the maceration.
Bin
Yeah.
sweating.
All right.
So what that does is it kind of mellows out our tannins and brings the bricks up.
And
Almost like
concentrates.
carbonic maceration in wine.
Yeah.
All right.
And one cool thing about cider apples is you pick a cider apple and it doesn't turn into that blue-green mold, patulin,
Yeah.
that can kill you, right? That's your typical dessert fruit. This when we're putting these in the bins and sweating them, they turn brown and leathery, and then you can't even put your finger in them. It's like, oh my God, this is going to be so easy, you know, because you don't. If you've ever bought bins of dessert fruit, and they sit outside doing a little sweating, they'll just all mold, a green-blue mold. Like, and we can leave these out here for like a month.
In fact,
After we pick 'em.
We were picking these apples while we were pruning this last week.
They're still on the tree.
Kind of freeze dried or something.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
show us the different trees you have.
Okay. Should we just go walk around the whole
Let's do
orchard?
that.
That's okay. This is our English foxwhelp right here. It's a bitter sharp. I call it the Balmer's boxwood foxwhelp because I've read recently where it came from, and a lot of these apples have been smuggled into the country through Cornell, as I call it. Actually, everybody does. And then we ended up with a scion from up in Mount Vernon at WSU, and had them grafted on dwarf stock in two different methods, bench graft and bud graft. Our bud graft took 2 years, and that's some of our later season apples over there, bloom time wise. And the bench graft was 1 year, and they're just a little stick. So we got a pile of these little sticks, and we started planting a few rows, started putting in a few wires, and the first thing I realized is we have to cut their heads off completely.
Keep growing up.
Well, they'll grow up and then we can make this whirl at each point all the way up. And there you go. And it was like kind of hard after we've been putting all this effort in to just whack them all off. And then we saw this thing happen. Anyway.
Well, you know, America used to have a lot of apples brought over from England and Normandy and such, but then during Prohibition, as you well know, the Prohibitionists cut down all the cider trees, all the apple trees. And so we had a handful of varietals to choose from, and none of them were much good for making cider.
They had a real problem with apples in general as evil during the temperance movement there, and just saw this to be a way to put down the man that was working on the land, because there wasn't that much problem with a low alcohol cider compared to whiskey, and the temperance movement, there were all these wives losing their husbands to whiskey, and they'd never come home at night. Like,
well, not only that, I read a description of a court case one time, pre-Prohibition, and they had a jug of whiskey, and it got passed around to the jury, to the lawyers, to the defendant, to the judge, and it kind of just made the round all the way through the proceedings. And I mean, it's a good way to deal with all that legal stuff.
I
in my
know.
book.
I know. They are saying now that there's some of the prohibition trees, some of those, there's like one out there still. And they're selling scion on that and grafting it in. It's about a $35 stick. They say this once in a while because there's a lot of apple sleuths out there that are looking for ancient apples and the ancient history of America.
I think that's fun.
It's really fun.
Down.
Yeah, and it happens everywhere, especially out in the woods. Yeah, there's just so much homesteading going on back in the days, and they've done that, especially up in here in Washington, Oregon. It's kind of interesting. Well, we're into a new bloom time here.
You can see.
I noticed there's no bud.
Yeah. And so this was another reality that we had to just learn about, was that we had come up with the early season bloom is a normal season for Eastern Washington apples. And we had a next season bloom, and then the furthest one out there where we're picking in like November, December.
That's late.
It's really late, yeah. Yeah. And we're going for the bricks. And so they get so high, you know, there's not much sunlight. We throw them in the bins, we keep them there for a while, and the bricks rise and the tannins. And that was really hard to figure out what to do. And like this year...
Blending? Or the
No,
harvesting?
just actually here in the orchard. And so with this year, Nancy and Colin and Philippe got out here and started pruning by bloom time so that they were done as these things, because it happens pretty quick.
Just finished the very last.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
If you were in Eastern Washington, you'd be going, "What? They're pruning now?" But
Yeah, because it's been a long time over.
got
Right.
full blossoms.
Right, right.
So this is done very well this year, and our next step would be, well, we're thinking about bringing hand pollinating again. That's another thing that we do to bring up our numbers up.
You're just controlling every aspect
True.
of the cider.
And it's all allowed. I've made this all allowed in organics.
Tiny.
They had to. They asked me whether or not the pollen had preservatives, because that's their main question. It's like, I don't know. Why would they do that? So we found out from this ancient pollen company in Moxie, Washington, that they didn't do that. So we're allowed to do that, and we'll be allowed to do that until we find it uncomfortable with the genetic engineered apples that are being grown Eastern Washington
How
now.
do you feel about those?
Oh man, that should never been allowed. All that stuff. I really hate those people. Absolutely.
I understand.
Yeah. I don't know what to do with them. They're everywhere. But there's no reason for that. We have a masterful agricultural program, especially in organics, and there's no reason for that except full-on profit. That's what they're after.
Cosmic Crisp.
Number one.
Adding
That's a
money to
hard
the bottom line.
$3.99 a pound at a time when most apples were less than half that. I'm talking about in the grocery stores.
Yeah, like your Honey Crisp. or
Exactly.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's what we call in your business a dessert apple, a sweet apple.
It is.
High sugars, very high. And Americans
candy.
like to eat sweet.
I know they
I
do.
don't like that, but it's true.
And they're really disturbed by the brown of an apple. And when they're going in and splitting an RNA to solve that problem in these genetic engineered apples, they pull that out so it doesn't brown, but that browning is their immune system. So they pull their immune system out, and you're like going, who are these people that get to do these kind of godlike operations like this? Because this will eventually...
The Cosmic Crisp, though. That's the Arctic.
Fuji and Granny Smith.
And the Granny?
Well, they're after all of them and all the fruit, but they've
Well, because they
started.
can charge more because it's a proprietary business. Once they change one or two genes, then you can't have that apple without going through that.
It's been allowed.
The thing where I work is the fact that they say, okay, Honeycrisp is more expensive because it has a longer hang time on the tree, and they have to invest more water into that tree.
Oh, that's true.
That does make sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, and speaking of water, I decided to do drip irrigation here, and a couple things happened because my whole orchard method is flaming and steaming here. So when I
You
started
mean for controlling weeds and such?
weeds, pathogens in the soil, bacteria, and then in my steaming process I just knock out all the powdery mildew and the insects if I want to. But sometimes
no chemicals, no sulfurs in the ground.
Never a single chemical. There's only two things I do out here is a fert and a lime, and that's done because we're really wet, and so the lime brings the sweetness up and balances it all out. And as you can see, there's really not much disease, and I have not used a single chemical in here, and that's the conventional people's main way of growing. Look how pretty it is. It's like, no, it isn't. Look, if you put it in if you had some kind of Geiger counter that you could, and it would read out all the pesticides they put on there.
I grew up in Mexico City, and in Mexico City, when I lived there when I was younger, I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, they'd have apples, and they were little, kind of ugly apples, and they were delicious. And then I came to the United States in the summers, and I bit into a big Red Delicious, and I thought I was eating, I don't know, moldy bread.
Moldy bread,
did not
mush.
taste good.
No.
They were pretty, they were shiny, they were red, there were no spots, and they ship well, and they hold forever in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
But damn, they didn't taste good.
No, there was no taste, yeah.
It's all about looks.
Yeah.
Now the foil around the base of the tree is when you're using the burn method?
Yes. And those foils, those are all my fire shelter I packed around California and all the Northwest. And Philippe did too, because he worked with me. And I found, well, what am I going to, because this flaming thing's used in people's driveways and stuff like that. And I decided to use it in here because I came home from fire season and went, well, I would do prescribed fire all the time, and that's what I'm doing underneath here to take care of the whole program.
I think that is so cool. I mean, you spent most of your life fighting forest fires. You are an expert in the field, and if anybody knows how to use a flame, it would be you.
Yeah.
Yep. And look what you've created.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It is pretty simple to create perfectly healthy fruit without anything else. Yeah. There's an organic test to see if there's any type of chemicals that would be too much to be, and you lose your organic certification. Right. So when you get this audit, you're like, except ours came back 0. Absolutely nothing
5
on those trees.
And 0.
It was 0.
Congratulations.
I know. Thanks, man.
Let's move on now.
Okay.
It's kind of surprising considering that we're surrounded by forest lands.
Well, I was
certified organic. Is that we had to notify all our neighbors that they had limitations of what they could do, but they couldn't affect our
really?
land. And that included the DNR, which was our big neighbor over here.
Yeah.
So instead of doing any spraying, they had to come in and do whatever they wanted to do at a little bit at a time, manually.
Yeah. So they brought prison crews in and manually went out and thinned.
So they protected our land,
yeah,
which was great.
Yeah.
Well, it's good that you have a neighbor that will cooperate with you.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because there's stuff that we get in the produce department that is, Cal Organic from California, and it's organic.
Right.
And on that box it says cannot be exported to Canada.
Oh.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's because of
Yeah,
the pesticides that are in the ground that are not picked up.
Bud break season, the trees start here?
Right. Do I have it?
There's a Kingston Black, so yeah.
Right here, yeah, there's a flagging. So right here
right on
over.
that.
Yeah. I busted these up into about 7 rows so I could like mow and flame and irrigate and just make it easier for myself, like where have I been? And it's easier to see. Yeah, this is just fresh prune. It's easier to see the bloom time this way too. Well, it'll be a lot easier this year. Yeah, look at what these things look like hanging out. They just haven't gone away.
This has got kind of a more gnarly appearance to it.
Yeah.
We saw that. I noticed that in the last couple rows.
Over there.
Yeah.
This is all fruit bud.
Yeah, these late seasons are kind of strange. And is this it? This is the browns now?
Oh, look.
And we probably cut
Look
off.
what we're walking on.
Those are a year old.
Yeah, but look at the size.
Yeah, that's typical of the size, right?
Check this out.
What's the
That's
unique
the
thing
size
of cider
a
fruit?
Good cider fruit.
And see, that's been laying on the ground
It's been laying on the ground for
since
half a
last
year.
year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So of course it's going to be moldy and stuff, but check that out.
But it's
here
really,
we go.
it's just bruised. It's not even.
Yeah,
Philippe.
that one's still. I eat those once in a while just to check them out. They're
What
not
you
that
got
bad.
to?
But that's about it.
Yeah.
You know who really likes them is the coyotes.
Yeah.
They come out. They come out and they'll like stand up on their hind legs and pick them out of the trees.
Yeah. Like daily, yeah.
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 I would say cool, except that's your crop.
No.
Oh no, this is the
after
extra.
harvest, and there's a
Oh, the
bee
cleanup.
around and-
Afterwards.
A lot of people like to use geese for that, and we're like, no, we're a wildlife refuge. Geese is a domesticant, and so I was like, what are we
Plus
going to
they're
do? Yeah, yeah, and you have this potential pathogen that comes from
I didn't think about that.
that, and that's a bad one. And we, so far so good on the pathogen with the coyotes. I think they're pretty clean. And I'm looking, what can I do?
Well, they're out here in the winter anyway, and we're not harvesting till the next.
Yeah. But it's great to see them out here. They are characters. They also take care, one of our biggest problems here is voles, and we have two. We have an Oregon vole and a Townsend vole. They strictly love the
What are
roots.
these little guys about this big that dig through and eat up roots? And
Eat
then come
the
up.
root system, yeah.
So,
Which are some of
can
our...
you tell if a tree's been attacked?
Yeah, we should go over and I can show you
Let's do
something
that.
really weird about that.
Check this out.
So
Oh.
smell that apple.
Yeah, smell.
Yeah.
Now that's a bittersweet smell. These are brown.
That's subtler than I expected.
Well, it's been maturing. They're
Yeah.
on the
Yeah,
ground.
it's been sweating for 9 months.
Nice.
Yeah, I know, isn't that weird?
And these are brown snout. They're a lot less tannic than the bilberry.
Yeah. People love the brown snout. They've got some tests going on in some of the colleges to pick those by machines. What we got here is our pollinators, the early mason bees.
I thought those were mason bee
Yeah,
things.
these are just huts.
No
and-
honey.
No, they're solitary, and so we don't have to worry about all of them dying off. Mason bees have a problem too because of the chemicals that's used in America. They're getting killed off, but they're, where we are, since
Where I live, they live in the ground out in my orchard.
they do.
Dead orchard.
Yeah. But it's great because you don't have that problem of having to manage bees. And we've had a lot of people say, do you want to raise bees here? And it's like, how much honey am I going to get? Like 7 gallons? Like,
Why?
Yeah. So I wanted something solitary, and so we're moving forward on these solitary bees. We've got the big bumblebees, and there's a thing about this is that when they're out, they're only the early season. The blue orchard mason bees.
Oh, so they only basically pollinate one group of the trees.
Time period wise, and then the other wild bees come out for these other 2 time periods. That's becoming quite an industry because it's really necessary as our bees disappear.
Well, bees are dying off the face of the earth. I mean,
They are.
Hornet on top of all that.
We have hornets, bald-faced, we have them all, not the big one yet. But they're pollinators too, so we have to live with it. I have a bee,
Hornets
so
are?
yeah, they'll be out pollinating with everybody else, and
thought
then
they were
while they're pollinating, they're eating something, like an insect, because they're kind of mean like that.
What you got there, Philippe?
Oh, just not the brown snout. Found on the ground.
See if that has that same smell.
That's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Too bad we couldn't air that smell.
Yeah. Really too bad.
They're still juicing those things. It's kind of amazing,
Yeah,
isn't
look
it?
at that.
I can't believe that. Yeah, these apples surprise us all the time. Even we've been doing this all along. They always surprise us on something like
I thought
this.
that This one, though, this is a bilberry. I don't know that there's anything in it.
In my last life,
Very.
we used to buy pears from Lake County,
Oh, okay.
a whole pallet,
Can I see your name?
still in the bin. They're picking bins,
Yep.
and that's how we bought it. And we could deal with the big guys
Uh-huh.
on selling those pears. 'cause
That's
we
cool.
could undercut our cost because they're not in a box. They're not about. We had to do all that work, but it was
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
cool.
Yeah, that's how it's mainly done. And then the big companies got them all packaged up for you. And it's just quite an industry itself. Yeah. What'd you do?
Oh, we ate
Tossed it. Oh, you did? What'd you
took
think?
a bite. Nothing. There's nothing there.
Well, so what else you want to show us here?
Well, here's an obvious problem here. This tree is the same as all of them. We fert these, we irrigate them, we drip irrigate them, and we do all the same things and everything. And this is part of what happens with our rodent problem. And it's not the moles, it's the voles. And if I pull this out, because it hasn't really grown for years, there'll probably be just this pencil tip and no
So all the
bark
little
on it.
roots are probably eaten up already.
Yes.
And that's why it's not growing.
It's not quite growing, but it takes a long time for cider trees to be killed, and so it'll still produce for a couple years. Oh yeah, and it's like this doesn't look. And you finally pull it out.
It would be like phylloxera in the vineyards. The yield drops and drops and drops till finally they pull them out, put some King George rootstock or something that's Native American resistant, and
Cool.
then plant.
That's it. And you go, do you want to pull them out to the very last moment, you know, and then, because it takes
So
a
they're
while.
still producing.
Yep. This took us about 3 to 5 years to get these producing, you know, after putting them in the ground. And that's at the first, you know, they were first in buckets, but this is at the first wire, and pretty much every year they grew to a different wire. And, you know, at this point in time, it's just managing the whole wood system, this organic, and keeping it up, and the same thing with the trellis system. And again, being certified organic first in the state, we couldn't put in treated post anywhere. It's not allowed.
Oh, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, crystal.
Yeah. And so we used our own wood. And same thing, you know, you put them in cement, and it's almost 20 years old, and treated doesn't last any longer. And we have to come up with something else to replace all this. But this all comes apart. I found different pieces that I can actually take apart and rewire and tighten, and it's really cool. It's all made by farmers. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, working men that know what they're talking about.
Had to do it.
I like it.
Yeah. Had to make a living.
Somebody that's not sitting behind a desk.
No.
Designing something out of
No. This doesn't look designed.
You can see this was the last row we pruned.
I can
and it
see
didn't
that.
get picked up because we were in such a hurry that night. We just let it all drop on the ground. But that's a lot coming off these.
It does seem like it's a lot.
Yeah. But there were a lot of corrections that had to be made.
So do you limit the number of buds you can have per tree,
No.
like in a vineyard?
No, not really. You limit.
They do that themselves, kind of later on.
Once the
Nice.
blossoms come out, you're supposed to come out and thin the blossoms. But
To
Yeah,
lower the yield?
thinning the blossoms. And we haven't really done any of that. It's mainly a chemical and a whip. There's a tool for it too. And we're like, we don't want anybody thinning our blossoms. And so we hand pick the little fruit after it's pollinated.
So the tree can put the rest of its energy and strength into growing the other apples bigger and more flavorful.
Totally, yeah.
you know, for cider, we're not really after great big beautiful apples, so we don't really have to do that. We can, although it
I never thought
simplifies
of
the
that.
picking.
It does.
Good point.
Yeah.
Also, your skin to juice ratio would be higher, so you've got more tannin in the skin, yes?
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Now, cider fruit again, all of them are typically small, except for our foxhole, which is the size of grapefruits, which is cool, because then I brag about that. I grew that. I mean, the thing is, there's a picture of Philippe's daughter at about, how old was she?
She's about 2.
2, and the apple's bigger than her head. And like,
I'll show you later on.
yeah. Well, so that's interesting about the cider apples. The other thing is the stems. They're all short stems in cider
I
fruit, because stems were a development in apples for picking as they move through their generations and their labs. And we don't really have that. In fact, when we're picking, it's kind of hard, because if you got a cluster and you get your hand in there to get something in there, they all come off at the same
knock 'em
time.
off.
It's a lot harder to thin. So we've just decided just to let them go. And in the last couple of years, with the climate the way it is, even though I give every one of these trees in the summer a gallon a day, that's it. And as it gets kind of droughty and dry, they self-thin, because they're like in a cluster, and they'll push the other little ones out, because there's a king and then all the surrounding others. And they'll push the other ones out like a king does, and they drop the ground.
All right.
Here's our Perry, rescued trees from WSU. We have 3 different varieties here, a Romanian up there, a Hindi Huffcap, and a yellow Huffcap. And I still haven't looked up those 4 varieties out in the field by the trees, but those are standard trees that will grow 30 feet by 30 feet. So I put them in my soil, and they'll probably only grow 10 by 10. Yeah, it's glacial still. That's it. That's the basics of Alpenfire Orchard Organic. And I think now we'll move over to Cider House.
Works for me.
Okay.